There is nothing wrong with your television set. Do not attempt to adjust the picture.
The year is 1988. The Dakar Rally was in a peak it wouldn't see for another 30 years.
Pierre-Marie Poli lies on the bike to try and gain a little bit of straight line speed, just to prove that all the motorcycle riders on the Dakar really are crazy.
The bikes were big, the cars were insanely fast, and the trucks were even faster.
The DAF truck of Yann de Roy on the far side, actually going faster than the Peugeot. The prototype trucks were really in amazing technical configuration by this stage.
The world was watching on as BMW, Honda, Yamaha, and even Cagiva threw money at crazy French and Italian men to sell adventure bikes in the showrooms.
GPS di merda, 2 GPS.
Suzuki had the DR Big. Now the DR Big never had that Africa Twin or that Tenere success. They definitely never won the Dakar. They only scored a single podium and they didn't win the shootouts, but the DR was a good looking, fun machine. Well, at least I enjoyed the hell out of it. Since the end of the DR Big, Suzuki have been through some hard times. Financial crashes, a market that moved away from adventure riding, and a slow development cycle have left a massive DR Big shaped hole in my heart. In some parts of the world, they are still pumping out the DR650, and that bike's status as an indestructible traveller is legendary. In Europe, however, we can't get it, and Suzuki haven't done much to change that. So when they announced that the V-Strom was getting an off-road upgrade, I pretty much nearly wet myself. The previous generation XT was, no it is, a great road bike. It's a little dated, it doesn't have quite as many bells and whistles as the competition, but the underlying bike is still damn good. However, it isn't an adventure bike in the sense that I use an adventure bike. You can gravel road it. You can gravel road anything, but if you want comfort, playfulness, enjoyment, or some rougher terrain on your adventure, the V-Strom hasn't been for you.
Suzuki then announced a DE version that brought something entirely new to the V-Strom line. It had some intention of actual off-road ability. A 21-inch front wheel, new geometry, more suspension travel. For context, this little chart compares the suspension travel of all the main rivals, and you can see that the most prominent versions of the current generations of adventure bike that have high off-road capacity have a significant amount more travel. Suzuki have also made the leap into 21st century electronics too, with the new Bosch IMU and the associated cornering ABS, a current generation traction control, a new TFT screen, and all the fun little extras like cruise control. As exciting as that sounds, the picture is actually a little bit more basic, and that needs my 80s throwback Dakar desires to be tempered a little bit. This is a bike that is, after all, still a V-Strom, not a DR. Now, as much as we all love stats, one thing I have learned over the years is that the stats don't make a bike. Riding the bike makes the bike, and so instead of judging a book by its cover, I'm gonna go and ride it.
Where we're going riding, up there. Doesn't that look warm and yummy?
Turns out a press launch in Greece in winter might be a bit cold, and that is quite an important detail in this story of us riding the V-Strom DE. Cold, snowy roads, fingers, tyres, et al. all mean that there is a limit to how much we can test this bike on the road, because I don't have the capacity to get my knee down when the road is frozen. Over a morning ride on the DE, we rode a mix of sweeping mountain roads, janky mountain roads, and gravel road to get an overview. On road, we are working with essentially the same bike as before. That means the motor is identical to how it was, and it's still great. I think this is a very nice engine. It has been for a very long time, and it makes for a bike that is easy to live with. It's torquey, it's smooth, it's fast. Will it melt your mind with excitement? Doubtful. It's not really that kind of bike. The handling, however, is a slight change from the previous generation. The main difference for me seems to arrive in how the front end feels and in the slight height increase that we've got from the suspension travel. It is fine, but that is it. Seriously, it handles just fine. Articulating how the V-Strom handles is probably one of the hardest bikes that I ever test, because it doesn't really do a ton. It's quite light, it's easy to turn, it mostly does what you want it to do, it doesn't do anything unpredictable, and that's it. The wider handlebars do make the input at the handlebars a little more sensitive, and the 21-inch front wheel adds a tiny bit of vagueness to the front end. However, in the limited snowy experience, that is probably the depth of my analysis as a road bike. In terms of its long-distance touring capacity, the one thing that I do pick up on with the V-Strom is that I think the cockpit, the relationship between the seat and the foot pegs is a tiny bit tight for a taller rider. I'm 6'2", and over the course of a day, I would have preferred the seat height to be higher compared to the foot pegs. As we crossed the mountain towards our first coffee stop, the road tightened up, it dried out a little bit, and the V-Strom showed how well it deals with bad roads. It deals with those bumpy, shitty back roads like a total dream, and for me, it really bred confidence to be able to ride without thinking about it. I think some bikes really struggle on these types of roads. They get kicked around a lot by the little bumps. The tires quite often don't help. It can really destroy your confidence quickly on a road that doesn't have an ideal surface. The V-Strom is not one of those bikes. I think it's very good on this type of road. The suspension is nice and plush. It takes out a lot of those bumps, but it doesn't do it in such a way that it's marshmallowy to the point where you just have no idea what's going on and you're riding a magic carpet. The D does have one thing about it on the road that I do find very interesting, and that is the character. It is very smooth, it is very predictable, it doesn't have a lot of chassis feedback, it doesn't vibrate a lot, it's not overly quick or twitchy or anything. It kind of isn't anything, and that almost makes it a little bit dull to ride, but as an adventure bike, I'm not really sure that's a bad thing. If you don't want every single ride in your life to leave your veins filled with adrenaline, then this probably is a good bike for you. With my fingers nearing frostbite and a weirdly strong and bad coffee in my stomach, the road turned to smooth, grippy red dirt. Look at the view on this trail. Greece is incredibly beautiful. You know what isn't beautiful? The V-Strom's off-road performance. This is the most middling, medium kind of off-road riding experience I've had in a very long time. And not medium in the kind of way that a Tiger 900 Rally is medium. It's not medium in the way that it can do a ton of stuff, it's super capable, it's just not particularly excelling in one area. It's just medium, just eh. By that I mean it's a fine gravel road bike, but it needs respecting. Yes, it can power slide even on the not very grippy pseudo adventure tires, but it does really need a lot of respect on the trail because the capacity, the upper limit is quite low. In our short ride, two things really stood out: the suspension and the basic riding position. The suspension suffers a little bit from being short of travel. It very easily went into the stiff part of the stroke, got stuck down there a little bit, and I even managed to get a pretty hefty head shake out of it.
And we had a bit of head shake there. And this is going to be a quite consistent problem, I think, with this bike, because you have short forks, and the forks are a little bit stiff. It's pretty easy to cause the problem.
Now, in all honesty, that's not a surprise. When you ask a lot of short travel suspension in terms of off-road performance, it's difficult to achieve it. That's why most brands go as long as they can get away with. Now, in the past, this hasn't been so much of an issue because we had a lot of bikes in this category, but times have changed, expectations have changed, and now we're talking about most off-road friendly, capable adventure bikes having 200 mil plus of suspension travel, and they have it for a reason. In my previous V-Strom 1050 experience, the suspension is very responsive to adjustment. Removing some rebound damping and some compression damping will likely make the problem a lot better. You open the suspension up, it moves a bit better, and you stop that problem of it packing down. I also think some more 50-50 style tires will solve this problem. The riding position I also found a bit odd. It feels very much like the foot pegs are too high on the bike. And this is something I ran into with our V-Strom 650 XT project a few years ago. Even when you lifted the handlebars up and made them feel like they were in a good position to the point where maybe they're even a bit too high on the road, the foot pegs in relationship to the rest of the bike were just too high, and it puts you in this stink bug sort of position. It's a bit strange. A lot of brands run low handlebars, KTM especially, and actually this is something that I typically quite enjoy. I like the more off-road flat back riding position. However, This isn't that. It's not that the handlebars are too low, it's that the foot pegs are too high, and the relationship between them just feels all strange. It's kind of hard to describe, but when you ride it, I think you'll know what I mean. Now, if it was my bike, I would personally be buying adjustable position foot pegs and running them as low as possible. Beyond those two things, the V-Strom is a very pleasant gravel road bike. It turns okay, the chassis has good feel, I like the way the motor delivers power, and this is the kind of bike that you would happily amble along gravel roads and dirt tracks all day on. What's that? You want to hear about all the new tech and safety features? I really feel like tech should be easy to use and not interfere until you genuinely need it. And Suzuki, like most of the brands, I think have found that point. I never felt the ABS on the road, and off-road, it fits with this bike very well. It isn't the most high-performing ABS system off-road. I wouldn't trust it riding on fast, loose, rocky downhills, but just cruising along gravel roads, it is more than fine. The off-road traction control is pretty interesting. This is something that I have found a lot of brands struggle with. There's only a couple of models where the off-road traction control is good enough that you will never run into the limit of it. The V-Strom and Suzuki have gone about this a very interesting way, because when you put the traction control into off-road mode, it retards the ignition timing and does nothing else. Most other brands have some sort of system where they cut the fueling, they take power away from the rear wheel, but all the Suzuki does is turn it down a little bit. There's a very similar idea to how KTM implement traction control on their dirt bike models. The result is a very mild cut in power. It's not a safety feature so much as a little bit of assistance. It doesn't save you if you do something really dumb like grab a handful of throttle or massively overstep the power slide. It's more just gonna help you not get into trouble if you know what you're already doing. On top of that, the buttons and the new TFT are pretty well done too. It's simple to use, it took about 2 minutes to learn, and is pretty easy to operate on the fly. I don't know that I love the dash layout, but I think that's quite a personal thing. The question here is what the V-Strom is for and who it is for. And it's a tricky question to answer because I don't necessarily know. The V-Strom is a great road bike in my opinion, both the standard version and the DE version. The problem is that it hasn't changed in a long time, and that kind of seems to put it in a category of being very underrated by customers and the motorcycle industry. It's not something I necessarily agree with. We spent the afternoon riding the standard V-Strom, and as a street bike, it requires zero effort. It's so well set up and so predictable that you do not need to think about riding it. You can ride it very quick if you want to, you can ride it slowly if you want to, and it is a very capable road bike. The DE, well, the DE is kind of the better looking, marginally more off-road focused bike, and both of them suit the person who wants something good but not wild. My only other gripe is the slightly cramped riding position for me as a taller rider, and that would limit the comfort that this bike has on long touring days. The V-Strom is a bike that fills a gap that I don't really think exists in the adventure bike market anymore. Now, on a personal level, I want a new DR Big. I want Suzuki's version of a Tenere 700 or a KTM 890. This is not that. This is its own thing, and it should be respected for being that. In a market where everything trends in the direction that everyone else is going, Suzuki have stood still, but they've stood still on something good. It is not an exciting bike, but it is very flattering to your ability, and just sometimes that might be perfect.